How about that? Once upon a time. Good morning. Outstanding. All right, I'm going to talk about this idea of an operator. And I want to talk about this because I think that there's something going on in security that is a reflection of something that's going on in technology. And I think it's actually making us worse at our jobs. So, just to make sure that, we do this properly, and we include all of the proper disclaimers and all of that sort of stuff, the management shall not be held responsible for anything that I say, and we will not have any subliminal messages anywhere in this discussion. When I use a term like operator, I want to make sure that you understand I'm not talking about somebody who is an operator of a piece of equipment, somebody who pushes the button, somebody who connects one thing to another. That's going to be an idea that a lot of people think of, but I want to broaden the term a bit. And when I say hacker, I'm not talking about somebody who goes out and buys a hoodie so that they can look like that image that continues to surface in the media, even if it's got the cool hacker logo. One of the things that we find when we get into this business of technology and what a hacker is, a lot of people are concerned. They think about stuff like, when somebody's breaking into something, that sort of stuff. When I use the term hacker, I'm talking about it in its traditional sense as it came from MIT, where we're talking about somebody who is going to code expertly, even obsessively. It's unfortunate that it has other connotations, especially in security, but they are in fact related, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. One of the issues that we have for a lot of people that could be coming into this field, especially those who might be very good at making systems work and understand how systems work, they have this idea that to be able to do this, to get a degree in computer science or some related discipline, I am going to be spending the rest of my life staring into a screen like this, and I don't want to do that. Anybody ever heard that? You stare at a screen all day? You know what really cracks me up is that we hear people talk about how terrible it must be, how it sucks your soul to be staring into the black death of a computer screen. And then you see a movie, and they talk about, or they show a writer, and how romantic it is. They're sitting there, working on their novel, and it's on the beach or whatever, and they're doing their thing. And what are they doing? They're staring at a screen, and they're putting English words and phrases and so on in there instead of code. But they're sitting there staring at the screen. They're typing. This is the same mechanics that we do, right? So how is it that this can be very romantic when we're writing human language, but it's so arcane and horrible and soul-sucking to be writing code? This is something that we could probably do ourselves some favors if we'd like to bring more people into the field. The fact is, though, when we're looking at a movie, usually what they'll do is show stuff like this when they want to look technical. And so what do? We start screaming at the screen. So not only are we the ones who stare into a screen for 22 hours a day, but when somebody else has a chance to put something on our screen, we shout at it. Because really, how much work would it be not to do this? Come on. All right. I'm going to talk a lot about potential. For those of you who have seen me or know me, you've probably heard that I'm very critical. I don't like a lot of what's going on in the industry. All right, fair enough, I don't. But that doesn't mean that I don't like the people in the industry. Something that I deal with a lot is just disappointment. Because I get to meet a lot of really, really smart people. People who are very interesting, people who are very interested in a lot of things. And yet they latch on to something and it works for them, so they keep doing it over and over and over, and that's all they do. And they stop trying harder. They just keep doing the same crap that they've been doing. And if you were here for Jeff's presentation just before this, you'll see that exactly the same issues that we were dealing with 20 years ago are the same issues we're dealing with today. We aren't going to get better as a field if we keep doing the same crap over and over again. To a large degree, we've been listening to recruiters because we hear things like there's a shortage of expertise in information security. It's job security in information security. And the recruiters say these are the certifications that you need to get. The recruiters say, here's how much money you should expect to have. Here's how long you should stay at a job before you hop on to the next one. And that's how you advance your career. In order to make that work, you need to make your resume buzz phrase compliant. And you list many, many tools on your resume, with the idea being that when the recruiter who doesn't know the difference between a packet and a hard drive runs a query, they're going to find that you have experience with Super Painter Noseman version 11.4, because that's what the customer needs. But when version 12 comes out and the closed box is moved to the other side of the screen, what do? My skills are out of date. And the industry, that is to say we, have bought into this way too hard. And I think that it's time for us to take control of this. Specialization to the point that you have focused on one thing, and the application of that thing over and over again is not a good idea. Can you imagine something that we hear all the time? I'm a programmer, okay? You ever hear, not just I'm a programmer, I'm a C programmer. I'm a C# programmer. I'm a Java programmer. You hear that term? Could you imagine meeting a carpenter? I'm a hammer carpenter. I'm a saw carpenter. Power tool. I'm a drill carpenter. It is absurd. We think about it, and it's absurd. Why isn't it absurd to be a Java programmer? That's the only tool you got in your toolbox, Skippy? Specialization. We hear over and over again. You must specialize. Learn this particular thing. I am the same Matt Curtin, by the way, from Cypherpunks. I'm the one who published and maintained for years the Firewall's frequently asked questions. My job when I was at Bell Labs was to run the systems that would connect internal AT&T networks to the internet. There were no commercial firewall products, not a one. There was the Cheswick and Bellevin book on internet firewalls. There was a code base that we had from Cheswick and Bellevin that worked on Plan 9 that we would then port to Unix, and that's how we made a lot of that stuff work. That was my job. And yet, once Firewall 1 was out there, people didn't want to talk to me about how to connect their systems to the internet, because my resume didn't say that I knew Firewall 1. Really? I can't figure out that if I click on the email icon, it's going to let TCP/25 through. This is the sort of nonsense that comes from specialization. And this is not just something that I'm floating for the first time today. And I see that I'm not the only one to know this quote, so I'm a happy man. Robert A. Heinlein. Specialization is for insects. This is the entire quote here. The things that a human being should be able to do: change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. This is what human beings do. And if all we do is forget about all of that so that we can do one thing over and over and over, then we're just holding a place until there's a Lisp program to come along and take over what we do. What's the point? What it means to be human, what we do, is varied. But how we get there, how we learn those skills, how we apply those skills, and how we do those things comes from somewhere else. It comes from our environment. It comes from our DNA. Eric Raymond, the editor of the New Hacker's Dictionary, which is the print edition of what used to be the jargon file, had an appendix that highlighted a couple things that were common in the hacker personality, things that stood out uniquely or particularly by comparison to other people. High intelligence, consuming curiosity, facility with intellectual abstractions. Any of that sound familiar? Individualistic, anti-conformist. Mentally absorb, retain, and reference large amounts of meaningless detail. If you're a programmer and there's a new programming language that comes out, do you wait for somebody to publish the book, the cookbook on how to? Or do you go download the entire language spec, inhale that bad boy, and start writing code? That is the difference between somebody who is merely competent, who can get the job done, who will fill the hours of the day necessary to get a paycheck, and somebody who owns the practice, and somebody who will change the state of the art. The better a hacker is, the more likely that hacker is to have outside interests and to be more than merely competent. One of the problems that people have in trying to assess somebody else's skill is that unless they themselves have that skill, they can't assess it well. Who knows about the Dunning-Kruger effect? Pretty awesome, isn't it? You have to have a degree of expertise to be able to determine how good somebody else is in that same field. People who are not funny think they're funny. People who doubt whether they're really that funny are probably funny. And this applies in many different fields. A hacker, all of these things that go into that personality, it's somebody who is interested, who wants to know how stuff works. And somebody who goes through life with that intense curiosity, that ravenous intellect, is going to pull things apart and is going to develop expertise, is not going to be satisfied with a glass of wine. Oh, it's red. Where does this come from? How do you make it? How is this different in this thing that comes from France, from California, from South America? What makes a Beaujolais a Beaujolais? A Bordeaux, is that a grape? And you find that you can spend years pursuing those questions. And at some point, you start knowing the answers. And you've become quite competent. And you didn't have to give up your ability to program to get there. Some traits that are common among hackers that I want to focus on for the purpose of our discussion, trying to boil these things down. Focus, persistence, to the point of indomitability. Intelligence is necessary, but without creativity, doesn't do much good. Most of us, when we were growing up, probably got into some trouble. Did anybody besides me take apart telephones? How many of us pushed a piece of metal into the outlet that made all of those things go? Hey, that's electricity! I wonder how to test whether that's just like lightning. It's not safe to be a child who's very curious. But if you should survive the ordeal, it can set you up pretty well. That's a way that this personality type will reflect itself. Putting things back together, sometimes putting it back together differently from how it was originally done, is really interesting. Sometimes disappointing, mostly disappointing until we start figuring out how to make it work properly. We start figuring out what these components actually do. But this is the sort of thing that happens in childhood. And then we get to school. Boring. Did anybody do really well in school, good grades? About a third. Not a surprise. For a while, in my senior year of high school, my GPA was 0.9, which was impressive, but not for a reason that my teachers were especially thrilled with. And I said, well, quit making all of this grade depend so heavily on homework. Just let me work off the test scores, right? That would be, that's how real life works. Do you have any friends that you went to school with and they now tell you things like, I think I was better at school than real life? Now, isn't school supposed to prepare you for real life? How curious. The point is that this same personality is not universally strong. The same personality doesn't necessarily work well in every instance. And the fact is that we have to figure out a way to work through the world, and we have to figure out how to start applying things. And it's the application where things start to get interesting for us. Because even those of us who did very poorly in school probably had a favorite teacher, right? And the favorite teacher was the one that would listen to your question, that annoying question that you always had. What about this? Why is it just like that? And they would go, let me draw you a picture. We weren't uninterested in learning, but the way that something was being presented was a problem. And we were able, once we started to apply something, to get past that problem of something just being pounded into our heads for no apparent reason. One of the reasons that I had such a poor grade point average in high school was because I went to a school where tests were basically worth 3 homeworks. Quizzes were worth 2 homeworks. I didn't do my homework. I know how to do the stuff. So what I did is I taught myself how to use Unix better. I taught myself C. I programmed in assembler, 65C02 assembler, 65C816 assembler. That was the stuff that I wasn't being taught in school. So I learned how to do that in the time that I had. But I didn't get grades for that. There's a process that hackers go through, almost to a 1. This is called larval stage. The larval stage hacker is somebody who's green, has probably just learned to program, maybe just learned to program in some particular language that just really made a good connection. But this is the point where that maniacal focus kicks in, is just continuing to write code over and over and over, building things, seeing how it works, trying stuff out. And the sorts of things that, for somebody who's never seen this before, it's just, they can't understand it. Like, what is going on here? I remember being in my high school computer lab, and it was run by somebody who got there very early in the morning. I mean, he'd get to school at like 6 in the morning, open the computer lab. If you wanted to come in and get lab time, you could get it. It was awesome. So there I was, before school, every morning, and I got to work on my programs. This is in 1987, 1988. And I would do this every day for months. And in 1988, 1989, I actually had software that we uploaded to CompuServe. And it wasn't just that I was writing code in the mornings anymore. I would have to answer email from people in Australia who were using my software. This is a pretty cool experience for somebody in 10th grade. But everybody who becomes a hacker, almost to a person, goes through this period. Just absolute concentration on coding. Making the thing work. Understanding how it works, why it works. And it can go on for quite a variable period of time. For a lot of people, it's about 1.5 years long. Some people go through it a lot more quickly. Some people take longer to do it. My larval period was probably closer to 2 years. And, in that time, one of the things that I did after I graduated from high school, I assigned myself a project. I thought, this Unix operating system is pretty cool. And I did some stuff with ProDOS and ProDOS 16. And I knew a little bit about the Mac operating system, but I didn't really know how they worked. So I decided if I really wanted to know how an operating system works, I should probably write one. So that's what I did in the summer after I graduated high school. So I wrote an operating system for my family's Apple IIgs. I showed it to my wife a couple of years ago, and she couldn't believe it didn't have a Y2K problem. Well, I didn't use COBOL. I've actually had a few proteges, and I've known them just as they started to learn how to program really well, and they would enter into this larval stage, and it's really something. If you are a mentor and you have somebody you can see them going through that same kind of thing, it's not like you've coached them to do it. It's not like you've told them to do it. But they are just naturally drawn to the problem. And they have that same kind of focus that you do. And to see that kind of passion, for them to be able to harness it, to channel it, it's really quite incredible. And for somebody who gets through that larval stage, what you get out of that is that you're not just a good programmer, not even a great programmer, not necessarily a language lawyer, but someone who is wizardly in that. You can envision a solution that a lot of other people would not envision, because you understand much more about the mechanism. And you start being able to see things in context, and you can see not just this individual item, but you start to understand the interplay of that item with others. And you can see the entire system, this big, complex system. That is tremendously powerful. And that's where we get into where security now becomes a good application. Because how much of security is not just one thing that goes wrong. In fact, for us to have a weakness that is used by a threat to make a bad thing happen, we've probably had a bunch of things go wrong, right? Or in fact, it wouldn't be possible for that bad thing to happen if not for the fact that we hooked the crap up together in the first place. If we understood how those pieces fit together, if we understood the mechanism, if we understood the interplay, it's entirely possible that we could have connected them together in such a way that we could achieve the objective at hand without opening up this weakness. You know, we really could have made the cockpit door lock before somebody flew them into the Twin Towers, aimed them at the Pentagon, and probably the Capitol building. In many cases, the issues that we face in security are a failure to understand mechanism, a failure to understand how it fits into a system, and a failure of imagination. That is what's wrong. And that's what we need to get our heads around. When I was at The Ohio State University, this is after my obligatory .com stint, the .com tanked in 1997. We were one of the early ones, and we tanked early, leading the way and showing the rest of the industry how to do this. This was not especially good timing, because the week that we got the news that the .com is tanking, and that multi-million-dollar exit that you thought you had was going to turn into a couple of pennies. By the way, you're about $80,000 behind in your expense reporting. Better start grabbing equipment. That was inconvenient because that same week, I was in a cover story on Computer World called Super Programmers. The basic subtext being, you can't hire these guys no matter what. It's like, well, make me an offer. That was rough. I went a couple of months with no job. That sucked. Because as it turned, who knew? People read Computer World. They remembered me in this article. That was bad. Anyway, so I landed at The Ohio State University, and they gave me this corner office, and they had these sort of cork board. They weren't cork, but they were these like, where you could put push pins in that would just run on the height of the door, about a foot wide, foot and a half wide. And the idea was that, profs would post grades out there or whatever. You could post whatever you liked. So I would just go out there and I would start posting things like research papers that I thought were interesting, or things that I was working on that I thought would be kind of cool. And somehow or other, I got the idea just never to take anything down. So I just started putting more and more stuff out there. And it turned out that it started to attract a lot of attention. And students would come by, and it turned into kind of a thing, as they would always look to see what new crap I had hanging out there and try and figure out what it meant. And they started hanging around in my office. First of all, congregating outside, and then they would eventually come in and start hanging around. But when I first got there, it was kind of an issue, because there were a lot of people that were trying to figure out how to deal with me. So I come rolling in about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. I go in there. I'd never turn any lights on. I'm staring at a light source. What the hell do I need lights for? And I would sit there and code, do whatever I did. And so there's a whole thing about, does your senior software person freak you out? Do you have to say speak in complete sentences? Does he live in a dark, cold, lonely office in the corner? Does he know every damn line to every damn movie? Does he have shit hanging outside his door you don't understand? If so, you might have a hacker. The guy that took this picture, I didn't even know he took the picture. He came into my office, literally took my picture and walked out. I had no idea it was there. He became my protege who went through that period of time, and himself today is a wizardly programmer. Gravity check. So, there is a point at which you develop this expertise. Now remember, that larval stage, 6 months to 2 years, is pretty typical. So yeah, you're not doing a whole lot of other stuff during that time. But after you get through that, you sort of go through this transformation, and you're able to understand things like mechanism. You develop a good intuition about mechanism. So even if the box is black, you can still get a pretty good idea what's going on inside. You know how to test it and how to give it different inputs to see what it does, to see how it reacts with other things. And if it turns out that security is what you are interested in doing, and the way that I typically talk about security is making sure that what we say we are doing is what we are actually doing. And that's it. That is a working definition of security that I like to use. If we decide that that is what we want to be doing, there is this idea now of a security professional. Okay, we use these terms a lot. We hear these terms. They're thrown around a lot. I just want to take a look at them. What do they mean? How do we put them together? A profession. A vocation requiring knowledge of some department of learning or science. Okay? A vocation, what's that? A particular occupation, a business or profession, a little circular here. A calling. Okay? Well, then what is a professional? Or something that is professional, an adjective of relating to or connected with a profession. The fact is, if we want to help on a larger scale, we're not going to be able to do this all by ourselves. I have a CISSP. I got it in 2001. I didn't tell anybody that I'm a security expert because I've got a CISSP. I got a CISSP because it is a way to demonstrate a little bit of humility. And a little bit's all you're going to get from me. A little bit of humility where I'm willing to say that I am a member of a profession. And for whatever criticisms we can make of the CISSP, we don't have a whole lot of alternative in terms of being able to represent ourselves as a member of a profession, something that we are able to show to somebody who is not already well versed in the same art, that we are a member of a profession. Otherwise, we're left with hoodies and the sort of stuff that we see in the media. So, I don't hate it for what it's not. It is what it is. It's part of what is related to a profession. And when you're doing the consulting thing and whatnot, you tend to have those kinds of things. Now, once you've gone through that, the question becomes, as a security professional, what is it? What is it you're doing? Are you selling stuff? Selling security stuff even? Does that make you a member of a security profession? What if you're installing stuff? Installing security stuff. What if you're filling out forms, sitting in meetings, teaching people things, influencing them? Are these things that you do as a security professional? What is and is not part of the profession of security? Something that I was slow to embrace was the idea that it's okay to be the grown-up in the room. I'm not used to being adult supervision. But in terms of what the security professional needs to be able to do, to be able to help, we need to engage with something much bigger. We need to understand business objectives. What is it that the organization is trying to do? We need to know about the technology so that we're able to see, okay, the mechanism by which the organization is going to get that job done is to a large degree based on technology and the policy and process and whatnot that goes around it. It's the automation. That's how we scale. So we need to understand that stuff. Back to Jeff's point, we need to manage risk. We are helping others to manage risk. All of us, one way or another, are part of the process of putting something at risk in hopes of getting something bigger in return. And that's the reason why we make the investments that we do, whether we are for-profit or non-profit. That's fundamentally the reason why we do that stuff. So we go back to this idea of the operator. And there can be a very romanticized image of the operator, the experienced, quiet professional, daring. It's like, man, these guys are squared away. The soldiers that are not content with doing the minimum necessary. The ones who volunteer to be put through particularly arduous selection and assessment so they can be put into special mission units. Those are the ones who have to be able to work and make things happen when they don't necessarily have a whole lot of stuff on their side. And it becomes very easy for us to think of ourselves in these terms too, especially as now we see in a lot of cases, we're not talking about script kiddies being the threat anymore. We're talking about nation states in some cases, stateless actors. The fact of the matter is that there are plenty of people who are very well motivated to take the infrastructure that we run and to point it back at us to try to end the way that we live our lives. This is not an abstraction. We are not going to be protected by ships that are able to patrol the oceans and prevent invaders from landing on our shores. We have connected the entire world together, so the bad guys are just a few hops away. So it becomes very easy for us to think in these terms. And that can make sense. Of course, the reality that we deal with is a little more like this. Out of nowhere, here is the situation. Boom! Quick! No time to explain. Get in! Who's getting in? Whatever is going down, it is serious. This is the idea that I want to introduce to our field, however. The idea of the operator. And it is not for everybody. And it is not the only thing that has to happen in security. But for some people, it is exactly the right application for these skills. The hacker who recognizes that all of that stuff that they've been able to achieve to get to that wizardly capability, so they see that as a starting place, not an end to itself. There may be much ahead of them. Somebody who is able to handle an operation, not the day-to-day sort of what's going on, but there is now something that needs to get done. I need for this to happen. Being able to draw from many different disciplines, lots of skills, having experience that is varied. So when encountering something that you thought was a DDoS attack, for example, you're able to get in there and see, oh, actually, you've got a problem with the architecture. The software is designed in such a way that it's making all of these extra connections. And you've configured the web server in such a way that it will allow for only so many connections. Fellas, that upgrade that you did last night set the stage for you to DDoS yourselves. That is an example of the kind of thing that I actually run into in my practice, where I have to go in there and explain to people who wrote this stuff and have lived it for the last 6 months how their system actually works. That's not because I'm flipping brilliant. It's because I have that focus and I'm part of a team. That's also something very important. Somebody who's able to integrate skills to get hands dirty. And I'm going to give you an example of how this comes together. I'm going to use a red team example. But red team is just one of the many different applications where this kind of stuff can come together in the operator. Red team, conducting a penetration test. But why? Why is the mission for us to grab sensitive information? Why is always a good thing to understand. The purpose of a pen test, I propose, is to help an organization to understand how well it can detect and respond to a security event. It's not to find the holes. It's not for the purpose of figuring out whether we're compliant. It is to test the organization's capability to detect and respond to security events. A red team is the group of people that conduct this test. They are the ones who are attacking the system. Generally speaking, when you have one of these, the target is unaware. They don't know if it's a drill. To them, everything is real. You may have an executive sponsor. You might have a couple of key people who've had to be read in. But the target is unaware. And very importantly, what you are providing is going to have to feed back into that organization's security program. How well they detect and respond to an event has got to go back into everything from what technology they're using to the way that they are using it, and also the way that they train people, not just in security, but at the front line. The way that they physically control their assets. All of those things need to benefit from this exercise. It does not follow that if they repelled the attack, then everything is good. What would happen if you went to DEFCON 5 every time somebody port scanned you? You would go broke. You would literally go broke because you would devote all of the resources of the organization to trying to deal with this thing that happens all the time. And so the ability to respond proportionately is critical. And this is an excellent way to find how that works. So in this particular case, we had a client, and it turns out they had a need. Their need was to fill a position.
Dude, we're in the same shirt.
That's awesome. So normally I wear a suit. So if you look on the website, you'll see that's my normal day thing is I'm always wearing a suit. This is hilarious. So I put on this shirt so I could be in disguise. I've blown my cover, so I'm not going to show you what other shirts I have. I put on glasses, shaved up a little bit, took on a fake name, a background, made sure that my cover was deep enough so that if I ran into somebody who happened to be from Loveland, Colorado, I'd be able to last for more than a couple of minutes in a conversation. And there wasn't too much to it. I applied for the job that they had a terrible need to fill, somebody who understands different kinds of technology. So we get in there, we get close because we have some legitimate business purpose to be there. We can see what's going on during hours. And getting in there and having that kind of expertise, I was able to be a nerd, to wear a pen in my pocket that turns out to have a video camera in it. So as I'm all wandering around the facility, I'm able to record things and find out where things like video cameras are. And I've got somebody, a colleague, playing my girlfriend, who's there to drop me off, who's taking pictures of the outside and finding other cameras and where they cover and all that sort of stuff. So we can come back after hours. After we've figured out things like where the cameras are and all that sort of stuff, we're able to figure out, all right, here's how we're coming in, and we're going to have an insert here, we're going to have a rally point over here, here's how we're getting out of here, we work out the timing, all that kind of stuff. And for the first time through, we're going to sneak in, get as dark as we can, and go in at night and see, can the cameras see us? Go back another time, and ultimately, we get into the locked dumpster, which we were able to get because of a matter of timing. We're just sitting there watching what's going on, and we get the rhythm of what's going on. We get two people, when the time is right, to have somebody whose job is overwatch, just seeing what's going on out there, tell them it's time to go. They go in, they come in with these bins, these big Rubbermaid bins, and just open up trash bags, find papers, throw the papers in there. They're in and out of there in under 5 minutes. Bring them back to the office. Turns out they ripped a bunch of stuff up, but we put the pieces back together. So we get some pretty good information. One of the other nice things about being an employee is that they give me a laptop and an email account. So I know what their email looks like. I know what the help desk will present to them, what it's going to look like, what people are expected to do, so that we are able to have somebody else whose job back at our lab is to create a site that looks like their VPN and is able to initiate a spear phishing attack. And sure enough, it doesn't take more than about a minute before we get our first set of credentials. And we are in. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happened, and because this is not a red team presentation, I won't go into the details. But the critical issues that we get out of this are that we've done a bunch of different things. And we have to give a meaningful report to the client of what it is that we did, what worked, what didn't work, and what it means. How effective are their controls? Yeah, we got in with that spear phishing attack, but you know what? 5 minutes after we launched it, somebody had reported it as a phishing attempt. And the account that we were using had been locked out. Their window of exposure was about 6 minutes before they were able to get that under control. 6 minutes. That's something that's important for them to understand. Because the issue isn't going to be, are we invulnerable? The question's going to be, what bad thing happens when a threat actually does the thing to us? We have a 6-minute exposure. That's what happens. That's the kind of information that leadership can use because they can make decisions like, is 6 minutes too long? Is that unreasonable? Should we spend more money on it? How much information could you guys get in 6 minutes? We can quantify all of that stuff for them. The other thing is that's very helpful when we're talking about how this feeds back into training is that it's not an abstraction. This is what actually happened in this organization when an attack was conducted. It's very important for people to understand that because they can relate it then to their jobs and they can make something useful of it. To make all of those things come together, a lot of different skills were necessary. Programming was necessary. In this particular case, the job that I got there, this is fantastic. It's not one of these like, oh, I need somebody who can use Dreamweaver or, whatever somebody's using. They had a need for somebody who knows .NET and also understands the IBM mid-range. Somebody who knows COBOL and C#. Some poor bastard out there knows that. I'm sorry to report that I am he. But that meant that I could get that job. And that's how I got access to all those things, so that I could download all of the source code and put it onto my company laptop, so that we could then grab all of the data off of the laptop, the same way we take forensic images, so no timestamps ever got updated, no activity was ever visible on the system. There was the whole thing about networking that we had to be able to work with, understanding the protocol stack. We had to be able to set up the phishing site. We had to do surveillance, finding the best way in. The role-playing thing, learning how to develop and to live the cover. I was a programmer who knows C# and COBOL. And so I made a decision that Nick, that was the guy that I was playing, Nick's a little bit introverted. He's kind of socially awkward, which is to say Nick was extroverted. You know the way to tell an extroverted programmer, right? That's right. The extroverted programmer looks at the other person's shoes. And so I was that guy. So as they're going around and introducing me to all the people, and I'm kind of, bashful and all that, then there was a department in there that had a group of ladies that they were very interesting. And boy, I knew I could work them. But Nick could not. I would buy them drinks at a bar and I would find out all kinds of great stuff. But Nick was not that guy. So Nick had to retreat and be a little bit embarrassed and scared. How to do that is a skill. And it's necessary for it to work in this particular kind of scenario. Our red team was composed of people with lots of different backgrounds, and this is something very important. I talked about people that come in through the computer science route, a very common route to come in, but it is by far the only way to come in. We've got people with degrees in business, degrees in criminal justice, degrees in information assurance. There is some computer science expertise there, of course, but there's other backgrounds that are connected here. The guy that we had running our Overwatch was a former scout sniper in the Marine Corps. So he climbed up in a tree, set himself up a hide, and we're up on the radios. We got everybody all wired up, and he just sits there and he's looking around to see what's going on. And he's also got a laser, and he put a rifle scope on it. So when there was the point where the team had to cross in front of a camera, and they just couldn't hide from it because it had multiple coverage, he took the scope, put it onto the camera, and lit it up with a laser. White out. Just long enough for the team to cut in front of it and turns it off. He gave them cover, got in. That's the kind of stuff that you can pick up when you have somebody who has experience like that. Varied experience goes a long way, but the critical thing that ties us all together are the standards that the firm has. Core standards in data acquisition, handling security, writing, presentation, things that we test for on the way in, and things that we train people on Not because we're going for people who don't know how to do it. We're looking for people who already do it well so we can make them great. And that is our baseline. And now, on top of that, you can add your own particular elements, your own particular flair to that team. So now the question becomes, what are you doing? I'm in security. Are you in the business? You might be in sales. You might be in marketing. You might be buying it. Are you a practitioner? You might be somebody who's filling out forms. You might be somebody who is going through the process of seeing that daily operations actually work the way they're supposed to. You might be the one who's planning it and deciding how much this thing is going to cost, when we're going to start, and when it's going to end. Or you might be the operator, where something gets dropped in your lap and now it's your job to take this thing for which they don't have a normal day-to-day playbook, for which there isn't a product to solve the problem. All of these are necessary. Securing the organization is about managing risk. No matter what role we have, we are all a part of that process to help the organization to achieve its mission. And if you don't know what your organization's mission is, what the hell are you going there for? Somebody else will pay you. Do something with your life so that you know what it is you're doing. And by all means, don't pretend to be something else. There is way too much charlatanism in this field. Way too many sales guys who don't want to say that it's their job to sell the product. So they want to pass off like they're the guy conducting the red team operations or something that sounds cool that day. It's a load of crap. If you're a sales guy, own it. It is your job to make sure that your product, your technology, your service is able to find its place for people who can put it to work and to achieve their mission. There is no shame in that. Don't pretend that it's something else. And if you're new, you say you're new. We were all new. And the way that you aren't new anymore is by doing stuff. And there's a place for you. Operators, what makes us different from some others is the integration of skills, the kinds of skills that we integrate. And this has applications beyond that operator idea, but it's less about how to use the tool and more about how it works. Because once you know how it works, you can make it do other things for you that maybe the designer didn't even have in mind. Understanding things like programming, not just one language, but understanding multiple paradigms, understanding different platforms, networking, understanding how the pieces fit together, being able to select a protocol. When should I use UDP? When should I use TCP? It's not a question of just what the product is able to do. You might have to design something. You might have to build a protocol, a way to pass a message from one place to another. And understanding those kinds of things will help you to do so effectively. How to implement these things. And it might even be in the business, How do you put all this crap together in such a way that it achieves an objective? And you can go through this process building one thing on top of another. You learn to program. Great. You don't know about networking? How about you build a program that uses networking? How about you write yourself a little server? How about you write an HTTP daemon? How about you write an HTTP client? You'll start to learn about networking that way too. Now you take your HTTP daemon, you want to be able to make this thing work so that it will automatically answer whenever somebody hits it. You're going to learn something about operating systems. Are you going to have the inetd launch the thing? Or are you going to run the daemon and start it up out of a startup script? That's how you learn about operating systems. You're putting all those pieces together. And there are skills beyond the technology. So here's some fun stuff. Things that you can do outside of the technology. Anybody practice magic? You learn sleight of hand? This is fantastic stuff, isn't it? The social engineering, you learn about misdirection and all of that, and hey, look over here. Boop, you do whatever you want. This is great stuff. Theater, improv, stand-up. There are classes you can take. You can go on open mic night. You can do a stand-up, work up a routine. There's books for how to do this. It's terrifying, but it will get you good at working an audience, working in front of people, understanding how to engage with them. Games of strategy, different types of technology, like radio, for example. Things like martial arts and shooting, learning about precise physical movement. Fitness, actually having stamina, so that when you get into one of those things where things are moving that fast and you really can't sleep, making sure that your body is squared away so that it can keep your mind moving too. Training is critical. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. Individual skills, exercise them. Integrated skills, exercise them, and then have the team work together. I'm out of time. I'm going to hang around for questions, and I'm happy to talk with you. I'll be here until the conference closes. Thank you very much.